the big, huge finding that really scratches the surface of a lot of like cultural assumptions, especially in high performance, is this big cultural conversation we have about strengths. And find your strengths, follow your strengths. The strengths are everything. And take the strengths finder, figure out your top 5 strengths, follow those, don't do anything else. Or at least know what they are and really aim your career to that, or aim your behavior towards that, or use that as a guide for recognizing pattern. And by the way, I'm all for it. That's all great. I'm that guy who says, any self-reflection you do, I'm cheering you on. Like any assessment, any tool that makes you look at within inside, I'm like all for it. It's just that strengths are not highly correlated with long-term success. Right? There's not a lot of data and there is not a lot of research that has shown it leads to long-term success with the positive outcomes associated with what we care about in psychology, which is we care about happiness, we care about health, and we care about your positive relationships. And this myth that, we'll just follow our strengths to the promised land is just not true when you actually talk with high performers. Because my favorite question, and if anyone's down this, just go up to anyone who's good and say, were you always good at that? And they'll be like, no. They'll be like, not at all. Well, did you always have an inclination to do every element of what you're doing really well? No. Like me, man, I sucked on stage. This year I've talked to 60,000 people live. This is really important because this idea that our strengths are going to give us everything, it's just not true. I sucked speaking on stage. Matter of fact, I was terrified of it. Terrified. But one reason I love your show is because I had that intention of, I want to make an impact. And when someone actually asks and kind of owns that, like when they say, do I want to make an impact? And the answer is yes, and they own it, they realize they're going to have to develop. They can no longer leave their growth to randomness, because if they do, they'll always be mediocre. And they realize, I got to become something entirely above both of those. That's what most people don't see. They're like, we made this binary false conversation, right? It's not a true sort of choice here. It's a false dichotomy, we call it, right? It's not strengths or weaknesses. Many of you, if you have a big dream, a huge goal, you got to become something entirely above and beyond any strengths you even know about, feel, or own, and go way beyond any weaknesses you've ever even addressed or even know about, because you're going to discover so many new strengths and so many new weaknesses on the path that it's almost irrelevant what they are now. It's what's the goal and build into that. I didn't know how to write. I get a lot of critics who are like literary guys about my books because every book is different, right? 6 books, all of them different. And the reason they all read differently is I am challenging myself as a writer to develop, to get better. Every book I write, I'm going to write this like nothing I've ever written before. And I go to work at building a new skill set to be able to write. Like Manifesto, I researched for 2.5 years just how to write it.
Wow.
Not what to write, how. How do I get that pentameter? What was the rhythm in which revolutionist rhetoric was spoken in or written in? Just to understand that took me 2.5 years. So I had no conceptual understanding of it. It wasn't a strength. It wasn't on my radar.